So here's a question which frequently comes up. There's this idea in your teachings that patiently enduring mental pressures is what purifies the mind from defilements. But it's hard to square this with how the Buddha often encouraged disciples to be diligent and strive to abandon unwholesome states. That's a simile about your hair being on fire and so on. So one cannot deny that enduring certain things is an important part of the training, but if that's all you do, and you never make an active effort to remove what is unwholesome from your mind, then how can it ever truly become pure? What would you say? That's a frequent question which we hear.
Yeah. Well, the confusion comes from the person's understanding of what an unwholesome state is. So the natural tendency is like, you come from the starting point. What you have is basically your mind revolving around certain thoughts, like memories of sensual things that you experienced in the past, or things you want in the future, or somebody upset you or something. And then the easy assumption to make is that, oh well, if I just stop these thoughts themselves from coming up, well, first of all, you associate that with the unwholesome state. It's these thoughts that if I can just somehow deal with them, suppress them, my mind will be pure. But what you fail to realize is, somebody who has that view, is that the actual defilement, like the greed, aversion, delusion, like what is greed? Greed is leaning towards pleasure. Aversion is leaning away from displeasure. Delusion or distraction is kind of leaning away from the neutrality of the neutral feeling, because it's somehow not enough in and of itself. So then you realize, well, the defilement is not the presence of pleasure, the presence of pain. It's your inability to, your tendency to want to act out of it, let's say. So then when you have these kind of persistent pressures in your mind, instead of blaming those things, which is kind of what that type of view comes from, it's like, even if you don't think of it that way, you imply that through getting rid of the objects, by focusing on your breath or whatever, you're fixing the problem. But no, it's like, the problem will be fixed, actually, when, in regard to those same objects and those same thoughts, there is no movement, no internal kind of need to get them if they're pleasant, to run away from them if they're unpleasant. So that should be your aim, as that should be your measure for what development is. Because otherwise, it's like, you can say whatever you want, that you can jump super high when there's no gravity anymore. But what's the point of that? Like, what's the point of that your mind can be peaceful when these things are not there, when you have suppressed those pressures?
Yeah, that's a very circumstantial piece now.
Exactly. So then you want to recognize, like, even if you think about it just on the level of how the world works, there is no way that you will permanently be able to shelter yourself from these things. Like, things happen, unexpected situations come up. As much sense restraint as you might have been practicing, things will come through sometimes that will bring up those kind of mind spinning around this or that, and then you have to recognize, wait, no, the problem is not the object. As the Buddha said, the beautiful things in the world are not what sensuality is. It's your lustful intention in regard to those things that constitutes sensuality. So then that's the whole this whole need to discern the sign of your mind, because then you start to recognize, well, it has nothing to do with these objects. Like, these objects can remain there forever if they want. Because if you interpret that statement to mean, oh well, the beautiful things remain there in the world, meaning out there in like the external, in the city or something. But no, it's the internal, the world of your own senses and sense objects. Like these things, as the suttas would say, they belong to Mara, and Mara is in control of them. So in that sense, on that internal level, that's what the world is, and these things will remain there. You cannot, to some extent, they will remain there. You can be sense restrained, and you should be, but sense restraint is not about like, unfortunately that's how it's interpreted often, but it's not about preventing these things as much as you can as a blanket effort. It's about, well, when the seeking of these things would be for me rooted in sensuality, I don't do so. When the kind of focusing on the this unsatisfying aspect of these things, when that would be rooted in aversion, I don't attend in that direction. So that is literally how the suttas describe sense restraint, because it already comes from that understanding where you don't blame the objects themselves and even the feelings that they may arouse in you. You don't blame that for the problem. You actually see your mind, and you see this need to act out as the actual problem. So by enduring the pressure, you're actually enduring the pressure, which requires you to be, keeping the precepts and practicing sense restraint. So it doesn't mean that when you endure the pressure, you're kind of letting your mind indulge in these thoughts. It's quite the opposite. It's like you will have to learn to rein the mind back in order to start enduring these things properly. Because if you are welcoming the sensual thoughts, welcoming the thoughts of ill will, picking them up, revolving around them, proliferating these narratives and things that your mind will be trying to push on you, you're not enduring it for that very reason. Like, you're going the path of least resistance.
Yeah, so there is such a thing as mental restraint as well. So earlier you were referring about Mara, like it doesn't really matter where you go because
you're enclosed within within his range. Yeah,
within his range, which includes also thoughts as the objects of the sixth sense. Basically.
And it doesn't even matter which thought you choose, because the craving, as the suttas say, it will land anywhere. So if you just pick an object that you're kind of intellectual reasoning tells you is less bad than the others, well, you will be, as people would often do, like, oh, the breath is a neutral object, therefore if I just focus on this, I will be taking my mind away from the bad stuff. But that's, again, completely missing the point that it's not the stuff that is the reason for your craving. It's that internal attitude of your mind that will shift towards anything in the entire universe, regardless of its content. So if you see that is the source of the whole thing, then you will realize, well, replacing the object makes absolutely no difference.
Because you could have a sensual mind even in relation to just breathing in and breathing out.
Sensual, or you could say passionate mind, like a mind that is dependent on something. And that is the problem. That is the thing that causes you to be subjected to suffering, that dependence. So then you realize that actually, if you were to, let's say, that's why it's the middle way. So you don't allow yourself to give in to the obvious path of indulgence, but you also don't go in the opposite direction of trying to remove the things that are trying to bait you. And that's where you find that middle way, which is where you neither push forward nor stand still, as the suttas would say. And then you have the pressuring thing there, but you are rightly recognizing where the line is and where your engagement and picking up of those baits actually begins.
Yeah.
And then by training yourself to stay on that level, you're actually taming permanently, forever, what the lust actually is, because you will not be able to prevent these things from baiting you. Even the Buddha, as after his awakening, would say for the 7 years following his awakening, Mara was still trying to gain access to him. So you could see, even after becoming an Arahant, you wouldn't be able to stop these invitations of Mara from coming. But if you fully discern that kind of being an island unto yourself, as the suttas would say, that's how you develop it, by understanding, well, it doesn't matter how much this stuff comes up, but through eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, mind. It doesn't matter what things are being presented through those 6 gateways. It's my choice to cultivate certain attitudes in regard to those things. It's my choice not to want to endure them. And in fact, there's one sutta where it explicitly says, who is the one who has gone beyond, who has crossed over to the farther shore? And it says, it's the one who can endure the pressure of the eye, of the ear, of the nose, of the tongue, of the body, of the mind, of mano.
Yeah, I think it also says that that's necessary to gain jhana.
Yeah, exactly. So, because, well, that's a whole other rabbit hole, but the view of what jhana is nowadays precisely reflects that wrong view of people thinking that it's the object of the object that the mind happens to associate the pressure with. By removing the object, I supposedly fix the problem, and I enter this transient state of almost being on vacation. But the actual jhana would be when, in fact, the suttas describe it that way as well, in regard to pleasant sights, pleasant sounds, pleasant smells, tastes, and touches. Those remain there, the same place where they've always been. But internally, there is no more passion towards those things. And for that, you need to allow those things to arise. How will you develop this passion towards this if this is not present?
Yeah, but this now doesn't mean that somebody needs to deliberately seek out provocative sights in order to tame their lust or their aversion, because this is on a much more general level. You already have those sense bases, there is already experience going on. It cannot not be like that.
Yeah.
So if somebody thinks, oh, I want to test myself, let's go back to a more, let's say, urban environment and see how my mind reacts, that's already entirely missing the point now.
No, and that's why the whole training of the middle way that we described, the foremost way to do that is the monk life. So it's like living away from these things. Ironically, that's how you would be able to properly face them.
Yeah.
Because if you are exposing yourself to them, that view already, again, you're putting the emphasis on the objects, and you're overlooking the fact that more often than not, the very attitude of your mind towards the objects that's getting you to go there in the first place, basically the passion is already there.
Yeah, it's not seen.
The perception of these things as gratifying is already there. And so you might be kind of training some kind of willpower to say no to the wild animal that you've made wilder by going there, but you're certainly not decreasing the wildness of the animal.
Yeah.
So you actually have to go the opposite way of keeping the precepts, practicing sense restraint, as we said before, but then, you don't keep kind of running as far as you can in that direction, because that's another trap. It's like thinking, the more I restrain, the less kind of contact I have with these things, the more secluded from passion I will be. And that would be another mistake. Like, now you're going too far in the opposite direction. So you keep the precepts and you establish yourself in this container of, a certain diminished exposure to these things, but then even within that, they will still be coming up.
And that is where you have to allow them.
Exactly. That's where, like, being fully established in the precepts, being fully established in sense restraint, in wakefulness, in clear comprehension, as Suttas would describe it, then you're in a position to actually abandon the 5 hindrances, where you would be neither pushing, neither kind of letting yourself go with the momentum of these thoughts, which is what you would be doing before, nor are you doing what most people think practice is, which is to try to suppress those objects as much as you can. And then you start to realize that middleman there, which is where the chitta actually is, it's like you realize, yeah, I can have the exact same object completely unchanged, but the chitta internally has no interest in it anymore. So the same significance is there, the same, like you would clearly recognize this is the exact same thing that was arousing lust in the past. You haven't like turned your gaze away from it, it's still there, and you see, but now there is no lust. So that's what the suttas would call the opening amidst confinement. It's like in regard to the things that continue to be pleasant, continue to be beautiful, you haven't like put a mask on them so that, you know, the animal doesn't react. No, the animal has become dispassionate towards the same thing. And then that's where you start to realize why the Buddha used these similes of like the clever cook having to pick up the signs of the king to describe like this principle of recognizing your mind, i.e. recognizing where those unwholesome states actually are. Going back to that original question, it's not something that you would be able to spot by just looking, oh, I have such thoughts arising in my mind. This thing clearly is what the problem is, and that's where it ends. If it were that easy, then, you know, as the Buddha said, the whole Dhamma, he didn't want to teach it because it would be too subtle and it would go over people's heads. Precisely because of this, because even when the untrained mind tries to do something about the problem, it aims at the objects, aims at the
because that is where it always was, due to not having restrained the sensuality first.
Yeah, that's always where your emphasis was, exactly.
Yeah.
So that's just a continuation of the same tendency, the same wrong view that you would have had. So that's why the self-mortification, which is you could summarize as the tendency to put the blame on the objects and try to get rid of them as intensely as possible, that actually keeps you within the exact same domain. It's not that it's taking you farther away from sensuality. It kind of brings you back. By trying to go too far, you actually return to the same domain of Mara. And there's that whole sutta where the deer herd, it says like they by trying to run away from the hunting ground, eventually they end up equally caught as the first herd of deer that was just carelessly eating everything in that hunting ground. So the fourth herd of deer, the smart ones, but they realize like, wait, we don't need to run away from this stuff. We don't need to try to hide because, like, you know, the hunter factually could be anywhere. What we have to do is exercise mindfulness, but of the right kind, in regard to the things that are inside that domain. Which means, going back to what we just said, don't blame the object. See what is that internal attitude of your chitta in regard to it. Is there an obsessive kind of like impulsive tendency towards it? And you would see that kind of thing could come and go from day to day, which already starts to show you that in regard to the same thing.
You mean the impulsivity?
Yeah, which already starts to show you, well, if truly the problem was on this level, then this would have to remain the same always in regard to this object. But no, you realize that kind of thing that's sometimes like this, sometimes like that, while everything else remains the same, that already starts to show you those indirect signs of that chitta. And that's where you would be able to turn it away completely to the opposite direction without actually moving an inch in terms of the place where you were, basically. That's why it's kind of like such a subtle thing, because again, naturally you think, I just run, I just move away from this stuff that's provoking me, and that's how I will be free from it. But it's actually right where you are, but in that level of like the domain of Mara, right where you are, that's where internally the transformation happens on the level of your chitta.